My guest today is writer and director Wij Travers, whose remarkable debut narrative short film, The Dartmoor Cowboy, which draws inspiration from true historical events and real life characters. Now, set in the rugged landscape of the 1950s rural England, the film follows a determined cowpuncher who sets out to tame the moor while holding on to his pioneering spirit despite resistance from the inhospitable local community. Now, across his work, Widge is drawn to stories that explore memory, lived experience, and the complexities of masculinity and the emotional resilience of the human spirit. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome writer-director Widge Travers and his remarkable short film, The Dartmoor Cowboy, to the show. Welcome, Widge.
Lovely to meet you and lovely to be talking to you.
Well, I absolutely loved this short film, and I understand it's inspired by a true story. So, what first led you to discover Ross Salmon's story, and at what point did you know that it had to become a film?
It's a great question. So I'm a Devon boy at heart. I grew up. My grandparents still live kind of quite close to Dartmoor. So going to Dartmoor as a kid was something I always did. We went for these big, long walks and adventures in the wilderness, and it was I believe it was the winter of lockdown, which for us in the UK had snow on Dartmoor, and then we were allowed to go out and explore. And I was looking at the landscape, and they have these amazing wild ponies up there. And I remember seeing one and thinking, wouldn't it be cool if there was a cowboy sat on that horse? And so I researched when I got home. I just did a quick Google of Dartmoor cowboy, and I found this article about this guy who had really done that in the 50s. And there'd been a yearning on my side for a long time to step into narrative filmmaking. My grandfather on my dad's side was an actor, both my grandparents, but he was in a Western called Duel at Diablo with Sidney Poitier and James Garner. And I was like, I think I have to do this story. I have to do a Western. I have to do something close to home. And the character of Ross Salmon, just the more I dug, the more fascinated I was with this kind of maverick living in what is basically my own backyard. And so I was really drawn to the story.
So, for my audience who may be unfamiliar with Dartmoor or even what a moor is, paint us the picture.
So a moor is, I guess, the closest thing we have in the UK to a kind of wild frontier, which makes it a great place to do a Western. Usually it's kind of hilly with big, wide expanses, exposure, a lot of granite down in the southwest. So these kind of granite tor formations, which are synonymous with the landscape. Very changeable weather, very remote. And so a great place for a Western and a great place to kind of set our film. Obviously came with a lot of challenges in terms of how we actually filmed it, because we were determined to do everything there rather than cheat anything. But that's the kind of, we have a few of those dotted around the UK, and they're incredible spaces.
Well, the film hints at tensions between sheep farmers and cattle ranchers in rural England, which again is during the 1950s, especially in the pub scene. So, how much of that conflict was rooted in history, and how did it influence the story you wanted to tell?
I think there was definitely some element of, in terms of specifically creating kind of conflict and challenge between cattle farmers and sheep farmers. There was some element of dramatization there, but at the same time, from speaking to people in the area and kind of going back in history, I know that Ross was a maverick. He didn't look like anyone else. He didn't sound like anyone else. He certainly didn't dress like anyone else. And having experienced that part of the world, it is quite resistant to change. They're locked away in their own world. They're quite parochial. They don't like often the idea of outsiders until they really get to know them and trust them. And that's something I really wanted to kind of dive into with the story. Is it's a classic outsider story, someone who seems different from those around them, trying to do things their own way or a different way, often provokes a response that isn't exactly welcoming. And I think, funnily enough, in the 50s, that must have been something that really did kind of come to bear in that region. But more than ever, the outsider story and I guess persecution or distrust of people doing things differently is a story that still really has a massive relevance today, if now perhaps more than ever. And I wanted to use that to to kind of tell a story and make a message of actually when we do accept people for who they are, when their intention is kind and genuine, they can open up a different way of seeing things and lead to kind of communities really coming together.
You know, actor Henry Garrett, he gives such a compelling performance as Ross Salmon. And he possesses the confidence, determination, the resilience. Yet we also witness moments of vulnerability. So, how did you develop Ross as a character so that the audiences could relate to both of his strength and his uncertainty?
It's a really, yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because for me, there's something really beautiful in the Western genre, which is the kind of idea of the hero, right? The classic hero. And I felt like whilst that has its place, and I wanted to develop some of those characteristics for Ross to really be that classic cowboy hero, I wanted to bring a more vulnerable, emotional side to the character, someone who feels at times afraid, who feels at times uncertain, and I think is perhaps more of a relevant masculine figure for people to tap into today as someone to look up to and connect with. And so there was work with Henry in that, and that's why he did the role I feel such justice, is that he is a man of quite few words. He's got that kind of calmness. He's got the small characteristics in the way he acts that doesn't overplay things and doesn't over dramatize. And that's something that I really kind of looked to in his performances. But on an emotional level, I wanted to create a hero that we can all identify with, in the respect that, yeah, it's not about kind of the classic Western where you beat your enemies by a shootout. It's about killing them with kindness in some ways and finding common ground and having patience and showing your vulnerability and being able to connect over that. And I think that's why that scene at the end where Henry and Farmer Tipper kind of break bread over a cup of tea feels so real, because that is where things get solved, through conversation, through talking, through being the one to make the first move to kind of open things up and heal rifts. And yeah, that for me was a really important journey for the character to go on.
Yeah, that that scene, I'll get to that scene in a moment because it really ties up the whole story. And I found with Ross, the character, he is very likable from the very beginning of this film. And one of my favorite moments comes midway through the film when Ross is quietly sweeping the barn. There's no dialogue, and the scene is so short, but I noticed that that Ross, I should say Henry, the actor, communicates so much through a simple facial expression, something that allows the audience into his mind and to his heart. I mean, when I saw that scene, that was the moment where we saw the vulnerability, maybe a little bit of concern, a little bit of doubt creep in to his character. So, as a filmmaker, how important are those silent moments in revealing what a character is truly experiencing? Because, like you said, Henry knows how to bring it, like you said, with hardly any dialogue.
There was, yeah, so again, I'm really glad you asked that, because I think a big part of this film was starting with a script and then seeing what we could take out and then seeing what we didn't need in terms of dialogue and then seeing what we could just do through performance. And the structure in how we kind of ended up portraying things was to have a glimmer of hope or a moment of possibility that is then undercut by actually more disappointment. And so we really wanted to bring our characters to our knees, or to their knees. And in for that montage scene where there is no dialogue, it is meant to reflect this passing of time where things don't look up. Things get harder and they get harder and then they get harder and they keep getting harder. And you're kind of going on this downward spiral with the characters where they can't catch a break. But the reality is, and that is the reality of being a laborer or a farmer or a cowpuncher, is that just because you're having a rough time of it, the work doesn't stop coming, and you have to keep going. You have to keep going until you can go no more. And so you're in this really interesting bind with the characters, of this tension of, we know it's all falling down around our ears, but we're in it and we can't stop it and we have to keep going. So there's this beautiful resilience that comes through, as you say, without having to explain it through dialogue, just a shared look, proving that they're cold, the environment, where they are, this putting someone alone in a frame, all of that conspires to do the old adage of, show don't tell.
Yeah, in that scene that you were talking about between the farmer and Ross when he brought the horse back, and I thought one of the most wonderful lines spoken was by the older gentleman, and he was telling Ross, many give little thought to our way of life, but few have your heart. I mean, to me, that line feels like the emotional heartbeat of the whole film. What does that moment represent to you?
I think that is the emotional heartbeat of the film. That is the real turning point where someone in the community who is resistant to change really recognizes a character quality in someone else that they've not seen before and is willing to vocalize it. Now, what we didn't want to do in that scene is solve everything. So we didn't want to have a moment where he goes, you're great, you have an amazing heart, and we'll help you. The idea was to leave that thread just a little bit open still and go back to the work, because what immediately follows that is more hard work and more what feels like, who knows if this is going to work, and then the guys come at the end and they help. But what we wanted to do was just open the door a fraction to allow our character and our audience to just have a little rekindling of a flame of hope. And that's the point of that scene and that particular exchange.
Yeah, I love that scene. I actually watched it back a few times because it's just so good. And it's really that moment where the community, and it starts with one man. So where the
It's
community starts to accept, because it's like what the farmer told him, you made
mm.
it through the winter, which means you've accomplished one of the toughest things by living out here.
Which means we were wrong about you, and and what happens in those communities, and I think would have definitely been the case in the 50s, is there's a figurehead. Usually in that instance it's an elderly male figurehead who represents the voice and the mouthpiece of everyone else. What they say goes, and he is the way in for our characters' fortunes to change, and it doesn't happen easily, but it's just a little bit. And I loved being able to write someone with a very humble background who has this magical, almost folkloric kind of old law wisdom and the way they see the world, and respects like the traditional values, perhaps is somewhat stunted by traditional values, but can keep them intact, but also use them to move themselves forward. So there is a big character shift in Farmer Tipper, and that represents a character shift in the community as well as preserving tradition. And I thought that was an important thing to be able to kind of weave into that character as well.
Well, what I loved about it was he was a man of wisdom, where you can contrast that scene in the pub with the younger man who's basically just trying to pick a fight.
Exactly, all bark.
Yeah, and so we see this contrast between, well, really we see the contrast between generations. When one
Yep.
is young, he's not mature, he hasn't learned a whole lot. We have Farmer Tipper who is wise and takes things at a slower pace. He keeps an eye out, but he doesn't actually have to say anything until he feels that it deems so, which he did with that conversation with Ross, sitting there having tea. And what I found so great about this film was is that it takes place over 70 years ago. But the storyline itself feels so relevant today because it's really about pursuing a dream when the world tells you it can't be done. So for
Correct.
you, what do you hope audiences will take away from Ross's journey?
I think that's a huge part of it. What you've just said is that the pursuit of a dream comes in many different shapes and forms, and just because you might start out feeling like the odds are stacked against you, and equally, if you're on the other side of the coin and someone enters your world and they do something differently, is to just go in with your eyes open and be accepting, and don't judge a book by its cover immediately just because it doesn't walk, talk, sound, behave, dream the same way as you do. I think there's a real a lesson for everyone to be more accepting of people doing things differently, but equally that the pursuit of a dream does take a community often, and perhaps sometimes mobilizing that community is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. I mean, hell, we made a period drama western in the UK, and boy did that take a community. It took us literally going through the process Ross went to and saying, hey, could we film at your farm, could we film here? People did not like that, but people then, with a bit of understanding and a bit of understanding of our motivation and why and the connection to the place, really opened up. And so it felt at times like we were living a microcosm of the story we were telling, which is to go out, ask, build connections with people, and the world will open up to you. And as a filmmaker, look, I still am youngish, but like I've been the young man that barks and rages against something different. I haven't quite got to maybe the big wisdom of being the older man in the scenario, but I'm going through that journey, and it's a really interesting thing to understand how different male figures can play crucial roles and change, and what we should be looking out for, and how we should be kind in different parts of our lives, and that's the heart of this story. Is it's a kind outsider story.
This whole, one of my favorite things about short films is that I love period pieces. And everything in this film felt so completely authentic. And for you, even though you were bound and determined to film in Dartmoor, how challenging was it to build this period piece world on a budget and a schedule of a short film?
It was incredibly challenging, and I've got to shout out my fantastic producer Rob Jelly for making a lot of that possible. We had weather challenges, we had runaway horses who didn't necessarily play ball. We had our lead getting bucked off the horse and having to get back up. We had prolific rainstorms. We had illness. We had getting the right locations through ice and challenges of getting vehicles up hills, and all in the service of trying to do it as real as possible. And what's beautiful about the location, right, is it feels already like it was stuck 50 years back. So we're fortunate because 50 years back, it probably would have felt like 100 years back. So we're playing in a ballpark where we can bring a lot of authenticity just by being there. But yeah, a few things really played into our hands. Fantastic costume department, a fantastic art department, um, and people who were really committed to not missing details in bringing things to life, and willing to get their hands dirty and work in really quite tough conditions, cold conditions at times, and slum it in a really, really strange sleeping arrangements all together in bunk rooms, and just live and breathe this thing for a week basically and bring it together. And it was, yeah, it was beautiful. It was a real challenge, but I think I'm really glad that paid off in the end, because I think you're right, it doesn't feel out of place, and there's things that don't catch you as modern, etc. And I think that's our job as filmmakers, if we're going to, especially if we're going to tread in historical territory, is to make it feel as true to the real thing as possible.
So how did you handle the costume designs?
So I worked with a really fantastic costume designer called Carly. We went to a mixture of places. We started at this big place up in London where they do all sorts of stuff. And I went and did a fitting day with her with our main cast. We all came in, we picked some things off, we tried some stuff out, we found some stuff that we didn't have. Fortunately, our horse handler, Phil, also runs a Dartmoor riding holidays, which is essentially like a Western riding ranch in Dartmoor. He is the kind of today's Ross Salmon, which is crazy. He had a lot of things like cowboy hats and Western saddles and stirrups and bridles, and so we kind of gradually like hodgepodge this all together from different sources to create, I guess, not just costumes, but costumes that and props that were interchangeable. And I think we almost treated it like one and the same, rather than something they would just pop on. It was like, that's your outfit, and you're not changing it much day to day. These people weren't, they weren't flashy, they didn't have much to change, and so we just really tried to build it and give each character a sense of something a little bit different. For Eric Cole's character, Canadian John, he's come all the way from Canada and has been on things with Ross. So he had a little bit of shearling, which gives him like a slightly more North American feel. Tasmanian Jack, the cowboy that leaves at the beginning, he has a bit more of that like black outfit, Tasmanian kind of rough around the edges look, and it gives him a bit more bite and snarl. And playing with costume was so fun because it really meant we could align it to the character specifically and what we wanted out of those guys.
I loved it. And even with the cinematography, which is absolutely stunning, you know, there were moments where I genuinely forgot I was watching a short film because it had the scope and the richness of a feature film. So tell me about your collaboration with your cinematographer and how you developed the visual language of the film.
That's also a really lovely question. It was something that fortunately I got to work on, at least in the early stages, with my really good friend, cinematographer Simon Plunkett. He's got a lot of experience shooting narrative work and has always been a very close collaborator of mine. And so when we started changing and exchanging references, I think we were both very like on the same page early. We wanted to borrow from Western iconography in terms of how we frame things. We didn't want to bring in any equipment that wouldn't have been available to us in the time. So we avoided anything like drones. We didn't want to do that because it felt like there were no drones in the 50s. So we wanted to go basically sticks and handheld for the whole thing. We did one tracking shot for the horse shot, which we felt we needed to add some energy. But again, it was all of our choices were made to be as authentic to the period as possible. And yeah, that was the main thing. We had the challenge that unfortunately, because we had a reshoot because of weather, Simon had been booked on a feature. So we'd set the look together, we'd done a lot of it, but then we had to get another cinematographer, Toby Goodger, in to kind of finish the job. And I think what was most impressive about those guys is the way that the language that Simon had set was something that could be so well interpreted and carried over by Toby that I don't think anyone knows that almost 60-40 of that film was shot by two different cinematographers, which is really epic that they managed to do that. And I think that's down to setting such strong foundations for the look. We looked at a few Western films. We looked at a few other period pieces like Andrea Arnold's Wuthering Heights, again, set in the Yorkshire Moors. So something that would kind of set the look and the moodiness of things. And then also some oil paintings that allowed us to kind of look at light and how we wanted to do that in a really dark way. And again, not overlighting, not using anything too, heavy-handed. It was a lot of natural light or single source stuff, and where we could use practicals like firelight, for example, we did it for real. We used real fire and candles and lit with that. So yeah, there was a really lovely authenticity to how we shot things.
It's just the look of it is just so rich. And then even the sound design and the mix. I mean, you pick up the ambient sounds, the score, the silence. They're all
Mm.
working together without ever overwhelming the emotion of the film. So for you, because you're trying to keep everything authentic, even down to the way you film. So how important was the sound design and the storytelling, and who helped create that experience?
Sure. I should also mention for the color and look, Joe Bicknell at Company 3 nailed the brief on the grade once we gave him the footage. So I should mention him. But for sound and music, we worked with two fantastic guys, Jeff, who did the sound, and Harry Alouche, who did the score. And our intention for that the whole way through, and also Liam Crombie, who was our sound recordist on site. What I should say is that the intention there was to always make sure that our sound and our music were not competing with each other. They were needed to feel very much part of the same world. We obviously recorded a huge amount of wild track sound on Dartmoor, or Liam did, which we could then bake into things. And then anything else was very sparingly added by Jeff in post. And it was things from real world. So church bells, distant church bells, which signaled at one time, we wanted this metaphor of like, for whom the bell tolls. And we had it in the church, which signaled threat. And then we brought it back at the end when they walk across the moor, which was again, like, is this a threat or is it not? Really subtle stuff. We wanted to create a bit of danger and wilderness out there. So when he's looking out the window at night, we create some kind of sounds of, when you're alone in those spaces, you don't know what's out there, it's dark, you hear animals behaving in ways that feel strange. So that was all part of creating this kind of mystical tension that places like that really deliver. And then the music, I loved this idea of having a theme. You have often you have a character theme, and we tried to create this like repetitive little note sequence that comes back. It's only really really short, but it kind of signals changes. And I can give you a microcosm story of one of the tracks that Harry created for us, which is during that montage sequence you mentioned, where he's alone and he's down on his luck, and we go through that. And at the beginning, we tried this thing that felt very full, and it was big, and it was kind of obvious and classic. And then we stripped it right back to basically just be this really old instrument called, I think it's like a harpsichord, but it's not quite. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's old, and it's kind of rough, and you can almost hear it being played. You can hear the strings being plucked, and we thought, now that is there has a bit of what's the word? It's almost tactile sound, and we want to feel this, and we want to feel a bit unsettled and empty and hollow and unsettled. And the way it all had to play out ended up being very thought through and very tactile, but without being overwhelming. And it's actually one of the things I'm most proud of in the film is the music. I think it complements the world beautifully, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I continue to really, really watch, especially with short films, is how does the music score manipulate the audience, or is it held back to allow the acting to affect the audience? In this film, the music doesn't manipulate the audience. We're already invested in Ross, his wife, and some of the other characters really at the beginning of the film. And then we follow them through, their plight, their situation. So that's where I feel that the audience's emotions are placed. So I really appreciate the fact that you didn't use music to manipulate the audience's emotions in the film.
I'm really glad that you like that. That means a lot. I'm sure it'll mean a lot to Harry too.
Well, you had the opportunity to work with the Academy Award winning Slick Films. So, what did that collaboration bring to the production, and how did it help elevate the finished film?
I think it was a really great thing. Like I can speak specifically to Chris, who was the main EP on it. Obviously, we had Rebecca and Mustafa as well, but Chris Chris has a lot of experience with this format of filmmaking, and what I really liked about working with Chris is he is a very empowering EP. He is very much of the opinion that you, the filmmaker, should be making some of these big decisions, and you just go out and you either get it wrong or you get it right, but you make that choice, and that's the only way you're going to learn. And there's not too much hand holding in a sense of him trying to kind of come in and make your decisions for you. It's you talk about it on a creative level. He backs you. There's a reason he's backing you, and I really appreciate that. And I especially appreciate that more with the benefit of hindsight. I think that really pushed me to make something that feels more mine rather than like someone else's work. And I think that's a really amazing thing. Obviously, they come with a huge amount of experience as a production company as well, and they brought a lot to the table in that sense. But I think that for me was the most important part of it. And I also really trusted that when Chris did speak up and said, hey, I think you're thinking that thing. For example, I wasn't mad about the first ending I had. And I was like, I think I should redo the ending. And he was like, you should redo the ending. And having when you have that trust there, you know that when he does speak up, you should listen. And so it's not this kind of wall of information. I find that such a gratifying way of working. So I got a huge amount out of those guys in terms of having support, but also making me feel like I'm in control of my own destiny in my first short film.
Well, I love the ending in the film. I'm not going to give it away, but I love the ending. It wraps it up perfectly. And what has surprised you the most about the audience's reaction to the film?
I think A lot of people mention things like the sound, and were particularly drawn to costume and being sucked into that world. And I think what was really nice is that a lot of um, audiences, regardless of gender, really connected with the masculine story in that, and enjoyed that portrayal of masculinity, and a kind of more softened classic hero. I think that was really lovely. But I guess I'm not surprised by it because it was really something I wanted so badly to deliver on this film. But I was so pleased about the fact that most people who watched it really, when we pressed end and the credits finished, everyone was in and they wanted it to keep going. They felt like they'd been sat in as you said, like a bit of a feature film. It was not 15 minutes, it felt like an hour, and they wanted more. And it made me really happy that in such a short space of time, we built a world, characters, and a story that people were invested in. And I love a story that, especially in the short format, I love a story that doesn't feel too um, trite and finished and like tied up neatly in bows. I want a world where you go, please, can I have some more of that? Like, I want to keep going, because it's just that it's like the little tasty treat that you have off the table, and you just want a bit more, and it's gone. And because you can't have any more, you think about it. And so I really enjoyed that people got that emotion and got that feeling. And I think that's something that is a lesson I will carry forward with me, is that I want to leave audiences wanting more of the worlds I've got, not give them everything.
Well, then with the Dartmoor Cowboy, have you thought about creating it as a feature film or even a limited streaming series? Because I
I
would watch
have,
it.
I have. I've got a plan for the future. I haven't picked it up in terms of, I haven't really pressed go on it because there's a couple of other things I'm exploring for a while. I think I've done a lot of time in the Southwest and a lot of time on Westerns, but I have got a plan for a feature. And I would love to go back there and kind of, I guess, finish that and bring it all together, because really we pick a slice of Ross's life that is the most gentle, approachable, easy, dare I say, slice. This guy's life is extraordinary, especially if we go back in time even further. And I would love, 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 love to be able to do that and bring it to life, because the world deserves to know about Ross Salmon and the amazing stuff he accomplished.
Well, this film is a rarity in my book because it's less than 20 minutes. You get the audience invested in more than one character. I mean, because after the film is over, we're remembering all of the different characters. Ross, his wife, uh, Farmer Tipper, you know, the young man in the pub. You know, we're already gravitating to all of these characters, and it makes the film so complete. And that's very rare for a short film. And we didn't even need. And what I loved, this is what also makes this film rare, is that we didn't have to go through character development. You know, we kind of already knew what the situation was when the film started. You know, probably after the first minute or two, we kind of understood, you know, what the plight is and is going to be. So between Ross being a cattle rancher versus, you know, the inhospital, especially with the community kind of pushing back on him. So we see that. But this film is so complete. I mean, I'm like the rest of the audience. When it was over, I'm like, I want to see more. You know, I want to see where this is going. To me, it's a film where there's so many other stories to tell. You know, it's almost like I'd almost say the Western version of All Creatures Great and Small.
Yeah, well, that's a good analogy. I like that.
But we want more, that's for sure. And ladies and gentlemen, there is a quiet confidence that defines the Dartmoor Cowboy. The kind of filmmaking that doesn't ask for attention, it earns it. And with Widge's impressive narrative debut, Well, he crafts a richly textured period drama that is as emotionally resonant as it is visually striking. Now, drawing from true events, the film explores resilience, identity, and the enduring spirit of a man determined to forge his own path against the rugged backdrop of the 1950s Dartmoor. Now, actor Henry Garrett delivers a beautifully restrained performance, allowing every glance and silence to carry the emotional weight of the story, while the breathtaking cinematography and the immersive soundscape create a world that feels both intimate and epic. Every creative choice serves the narrative with remarkable precision, resulting in a short film that possesses the scope and emotional depth of a feature. Now, The Dartmoor Cowboy is a standout achievement, one that deserves serious consideration from film festivals, awards voters, and audiences who appreciate cinema at its finest. And The Dartmoor Cowboy is cinema at its finest. And Widge, I want to thank you so much for sharing your incredible film with me today, and much success to you and your whole team.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a treat to chat.
Well, thank you so much. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're at a film festival and the Dartmoor Cowboy is an official selection, you better make sure you're sitting in the audience because this is a film you don't want to miss. So with that, you can watch or listen to all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, iTunes, and more. And remember, you'll either see me at the movies or from the red carpet.